Hello, everybody. Hello. Hello. How are you? I think one of the lights burned off down here, so it's darker than usual. So if it looks darker, it's not my mood. It's just darker than usual. Come on in. Come on in. We got lots of room. Come on in. Come on in. Welcome. Thanks for sharing. Sorry again, it's dark. One of the lights burned off that I need to replace. I'm not really a fix-it man kind of guy. And as you come in, if you want to share this with anybody, you just swipe to the left. Why am I showing it the wrong way? Anyway, you swipe to the right, swipe to the left. One of the places you swipe, you push share. You can share on Twitter. You can share on YouTube. You can send a link to email. It's either the left or the right swipe. You'll have the ability to share. So please feel free to do that. The hearts are just saying that you approve, you like this, whatever. It's the currency on Periscope. Nothing untoward. Doesn't mean anything like that. It's just nice things to say. So feel free if you want to. Don't mean to be totally self-promotional, but thank you. Everyone in, just keep on coming in. Just as people kind of mill in, come in. Let's think about where people are calling from. Bob Ruff always says that we're a movement. I think it's true. I think it's a movement that's getting bigger. So I'd like to ask you, where are you as you're seeing this? You can just write it in or send thoughts my way, and maybe I can divine where you are. So we've got Phoenix, what, the 5th largest city in the country. Phoenix represented. Anywhere else? San Francisco, Northern California, North Carolina, Nashville, Middle Georgia. Wow. Anywhere else? Colorado, Connecticut, South Carolina. Wow. And I'm here in Twin Cities, and we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming in. Thank you for all your kind words. Thank you for your feedback. Los Angeles, I'm trying to follow it. We're going to follow the format we did last time. Someone in Maryland, very good. We're going to follow the format we did last time. We're going to talk about a few things. We're going to have question and answer at the end. And you can feel free, if you really want to put a comment. I'm going to try not to comment it so I can stay on message, and then we'll get to the end and we'll have question and answer and just randomness going on. I'm going to talk about Undisclosed and Truth and Justice. We're podcast, the most recent episode. We're going to start with Truth and Justice and then Undisclosed, just because it kind of makes sense in terms of timing. Thanks for the tie. I think I've had this since college, so it's starting to fall apart, but it still looks good. In any event, we're going to start with Truth and Justice, because that just chronologically that dealt with the time right after the crime, and then we're going to lead into Undisclosed and talk about some of the stuff that went down. And I want to tell you just off the bat what we're going to talk about, so you know that there's a roadmap, and if you're interested, you can follow along or come back later. And this will be recorded. I'm having trouble with YouTube. It's going to be available on Catch. Thank you for that share. Someone just shared. You can go ahead and swipe to the left or the right, one of the two places, and push the share button on Twitter, Facebook, email, whatever, and let other people join the conversation. So what are we going to talk about Truth and Justice? We're going to talk about what a profile is, what Jim Clemente was doing, and that it is an evidence but not meaningless, as Rabia Chaudhry said, which I agree. How it narrows down possibilities, though doesn't really exclude anyone for sure. And 3, that there are other possibilities other than the main ones, which are Adnan and Dawn, just based on the profile. But what the useful thing that the profile does, in my opinion, is that it allows us to have to kind of play through what would need to happen for some of those other things to occur. Sometimes I talk about definitions. So before I move into what we're talking about in Undisclosed, I think it would be really helpful if we had a different definition of what Jim Clemente was doing. Because when you say profile, people think racial profiling, or people, if they know about profiling, think about all the shortcomings that are evident in profiling. But what I would say is what Jim Clemente is doing is a type of preliminary investigation, a certain technique used, and I'm just going to talk about that, or I'll try to, because I think that's where it's useful, and that all the raw material that he has would be there otherwise, but he has a unique way, not unique, but a particular way of looking at it that I think is helpful for all of us. But I'll get to that in more detail later. What are we talking about when we get into Undisclosed? We're going to talk about that. What struck me is that the grand jury, as it's used in this case, and maybe Maryland in general, I don't know, is more like a mock trial for prosecutors, or a focus group for prosecutors, a way for prosecutors to figure out what they're going to argue in a way that I found disturbing. And the other thing, too, that they use the power of the grand jury and things associated maximize the state's advantage in the case, in sorts of advantages that exist in all criminal cases, just based on the fact that the state has a monopoly on force and coercion and can use that in a certain way in a criminal case, and the way they use the grand jury and other things in the case really maximize that to the detriment of justice. And three, that the Bilal arrest transformed the case and the implications of that. But before we get to the beginning, we need to, I think, I'm not going to tell you how to feel. I feel like I did that last time. I don't think that's the place. But I'm going to show you how I feel and suggest it as a way to feel right now, or a way to look at this case. And it's showing how a little bit of St. Crispin's Day speech. It should come out. Why is it not playing? Oh, look at that. Kristen Bale. Huh?
Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of
no sound? Okay, just a minute. Let me turn this up.
His blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England, now abed, shall think themselves
better sound?
accursed they were not here, and hold their manhood's cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day!
True, that this is a moment. I don't want to be melodramatic or over dramatic, and I'm not suggesting that everyone can feel this way. I mean, regardless of what happens, I'm sure Adnan's family won't feel this way, and probably Rabia as well. But for those of us who have gotten in where we're in this case, this is a moment that people in the future will look back and say, we weren't there, and I wish we could have been. This is a first. This is really a first. It's never happened before. We never had a podcast like Serial, the Serial podcast, and never anything like Undisclosed and Truth and Justice, now Truth and Justice podcast. I don't think it's ever happened. So crowdsourcing investigations. And here's the thing. There's been some talk about how Serial responded to all the revelations that Undisclosed had come up with. And lots of criticism of that. And I share a lot of it. And people can think what they will about it. And I certainly for the people at Undisclosed in particular, I would be hurt and put off and offended. And I think a lot of us are offended for them. If you saw the response, it was dismissive. And Serial got the cell phone record thing wrong. And I'd say culpably so. They could have gotten it right and they didn't. So that's where it is. But let's step back a little bit and say, okay, what was Serial? Serial was a groundbreaking podcast, but it came out of This American Life. And maybe I know I'm biased. I am a huge This American Life fan. But at this point, there's nothing more mainstream and, part of the establishment than This American Life. It is not some, startup with people who are activists or something. It is as mainstream as can get. And so that's what Serial came out of. Now, Undisclosed and Truth and Justice are so different than Serial. It's hard to even express. I mean, the subject matter is somewhat the same, but they're a whole different kind of thing. And so let's just keep in mind that yes, we had this podcast that took this Serial way of storytelling, which is great. I'm a huge fan. I'm going to follow season 2 obsessively again. I might even do a podcast based on it or following it. But what Undisclosed and Truth and Justice Pod did is these are real investigations. And I want to say something before I get in, and I don't think I'm getting off track. And maybe you think I'm Pollyannish or naive, playing St. Crispin's Day thing. But do you hear all the people for years who've talked about how short our attention spans are? No one has any attention span. Okay, I'm not going to comment, but I agree with what was just said. No one has an attention span. Yet people listen, millions of people listen to Undisclosed, and they hear about Supreme Court cases, and they listen to it. That's phenomenal. So I don't think that we really necessarily have shorter attention. I think we, for whatever reason, people are less patient to see if the thing they're listening to or the thing they're seeing has a point. But when they decide it has a point, they'll listen for hours, which is what we're seeing happening. But the hook has to be there. And yes, the Serial podcast provided the hook, but Undisclosed and Truth and Justice Pod provided its own hook. And so we're listening to stuff that I think most of us, me included, would not be willing to listen through. I'm not a criminal lawyer. I wouldn't read any criminal cases or read about Brady violations or anything like that unless there was a hook that Undisclosed and Truth and Justice Pod set in me about justice really being an issue. There's a reason why it's important. So, maybe this is just a moment for people, if you feel like you've had naysayers in your life, your whole life, who've said that the things you care about aren't important and that change can't happen. Well, it's happening. So, and this is a moment for us to celebrate it. All right. There you go. That's my little aside, or big aside. And I might be interrupted because one of my children, James, he's 3, he does not like to go to sleep, and so he keeps trying to get up. So he might create enough of a ruckus to wake the others up that I'll have to intervene. We'll see. We'll just go. Oh, he's banging on the door now. All right. Well, we'll just see how long we can do. All right. So, Truth and Justice Podcast. Profiling isn't evidence, but not meaningless. So I'm not going to get into the weeds here about whether profiling as a science works the way it does on TV. I'm just going to focus on what Jim Clemente did on Truth and Justice Podcast. And by the way, if you're interested in Jim Clemente, he does write for Criminal Minds, and he has been a guest many, many times on, I think it's called The Lip. Oh, I'm forgetting. Primetime Crime, or I'm forgetting exactly the show that's on YouTube. And he's talked about the John Benet Ramsey case, Jodi Arias case, a lot of different cases. And I followed it, and I tend to think he really knows what he's doing. I think that comes across in this one. So it's not meaningless. Why is it not meaningless? It's not meaningless because it takes perhaps facts that we already know and puts them in a different form so we can see what the significance of them is. So it says, we know how Hayes' body was buried. We know some details about the crime. What does that mean? And when that's done in that technique, it allows us to narrow down the possibilities. And practically speaking, taking all the probabilities, I think most of us agree, it narrows it down to Adnan and Don. Now, let's just take a moment to say, if you're on the internet, if you're on Reddit or somewhere else, and some people who think Adnan are guilty are celebrating about what Jim Clemente said on Truth and Justice Podcast, just realize it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to do that. All it did in this preliminary information based on the crime scene and a few other things, Jim Clemente couldn't exclude Adnan. And that's because, yes, that's why it's important to be precise about these things. And that's why, as much as bias, anti-Muslim bias, racial bias, whatever you want to say was involved in this case, and it certainly was, one of the reasons Adnan was focused on was because he fit a certain profile, of the person who would likely be involved in the crime. Of course, the facts show he wasn't and had nothing to do with it, but I just say it's not crazy that right off the bat police would want to look at him, but they should have wanted to look at Don as well. But we have the possibilities narrowed down, and we can understand maybe in a more direct way how the spotlight started getting focused on Adnan. So we narrow things down, and then we have other possibilities which are still possible, but at least it forced me, if I was going to follow down some of those other rabbit holes, to see all the implications that were involved. So hopefully in this crowdsourced investigation we're having, for those of us or other people who might think that there are other suspects other than, well, frankly, Don right now, and there's many I've heard of, this is the time maybe when we can start to fill in what blanks we need to fill in, or find facts that maybe we didn't see the significance of that could lead to those theories being supported or not supported. So we've got to do a full picture. So what were the things that struck out to me about the investigation that Jim Clemente did? One is a first-time killer. And one thing I've struggled with about the way he died and some of the both people focusing on Adnan being the killer and now focusing on Don being the killer. One of the things I've struggled with is about the strangulation. That's a pretty nasty way to kill somebody. And especially since, as I discovered for the first time when I watched Serial, I did not know this, how long it takes to actually kill someone dead from strangulation. And I thought, my gosh, whether it's Adnan or it's Dawn, they're attacking poor Hay and they're strangling the life out of her, watching it for several minutes. Wow, that's pretty bad, and that would seem more to fit the behavior of a psychopath than at least what I know about Adnan, and I don't know much about Dawn, but that's what got me thinking about that. And as I listened to this episode, it was brought out the chances or the possibility that Hay could have been knocked out in some way, which could occur for the blunt trauma injury, and then be strangled as she was passed out. Which all this stuff is just terribly emotional and traumatic. And I think kind of me talking about this is a way to deal with the trauma of it because it's so terrible. And that it was a heat of passion crime. Bilal, I'm going to talk about Bilal later when we talk about Undisclosed. It was a heat of passion crime, which makes sense to me. And the way I'd put it with the body, because I struggled about the burial, what does it mean? How many people were involved? Because that affected at least my sense of who would have been involved. Just as when they talked about the story about Adnan, who is Dawn or someone else going to call to get to help with this burial and with all the other things? And I'd say the killer sort of wanted to hide the body. And one of the really interesting things they delved into is that maybe the reason why the Hayes body wasn't buried as well as it could have been was by that time the killer had an alibi. And I will say, self-promotion, that I've talked about this before, but I did months back someone's asking about a female suspect. Okay, I'll try to save that for Q&A, or I'll try to remember it. A few months back, I did a mock cross-examination of Don, and that's some of the things I focus on, was how different his reaction was to Adnan's. Adnan didn't dream of having to set up an alibi right after he got the police call, but Don did, and that itself is interesting. And there was some talk. And I will say, someone said, I'm not convinced we're down to Adnan and Don. I'm not either. I'm just saying that the great thing about what Jim Clemente did is, for me, it showed the implication of saying someone else did it. Like, well, we have to account for all these different factors if we want to go down that rabbit hole of someone else doing it. And I think that's useful for this crowdsourced investigation to allow us to kind of narrow down maybe the likely possibilities. All right, so Adnan or Dawn, just looking at that right now, what always struck me is that Adnan was the least probable suspect of them, least plausible and probable, based on his relationship with Hay and based on that he basically had an alibi that, as we'll talk about in Undisclosed, was taken away from him by the state, it looks like, and how different they acted after the murder, which I just talked about earlier. Their behavior was very different, and hopefully as this goes on and Jim Clemente continues, as I understood from Rabia's most recent blog post, this is going to continue, and that this is going to continue, and as we get more into the personalities of the people, that should influence it. But at the very least, we could say in this case that we had a real breakdown in profiling that was, insofar as it's legitimate, all that was done in the case, resulting in Adnan being the sole suspect, because there was the initial maybe work done to say, well, it's Adnan or Dawn, this incredible weak ruling out of Dawn, and then Adnan is the sole guy and they don't look at anything else. How do you get others? Need to fill in the details. Where we come in. So some examples of that. So the third part I'm talking about the Truth and Justice podcast, is if we are looking down other rabbit holes other than Adnan and Dawn, and as far as I'm concerned, Adnan's out of the picture, innocent as can be, we have to account for how the person came upon Hay, And I know there's some theories about that. Maybe why Hay was killed the way she was, and why the body was buried the way it was. And so there's a lot of things in there that we need to look at. And the other thing is, shoot, I lost my train of thought for a moment. Just give me a second. Details. Yeah, one interesting thing that I've heard pointed out, and it strikes me, is that if we're going down the serial killer route, what about the Jada Lambert case, and what about the details behind the crime? And it was suggested about a Public Records Act request for that, and that might be useful if someone is doing those. That would be a good one to have, and that would allow us to look more, comparing that case, and maybe Jim Clemente comparing that case to this case, and see that we've talked about there being such a low probability that's a serial killer. We had a serial killer loose, and does what he did to Jada fit the case of Hay? I suspect a lot of ways it doesn't, but maybe it does, and that might allow us to do more. And of course, there's a lot more involved with Jay and Jen and other people, but hopefully the Jim Clemente interview gave us a roadmap. And I will say, I don't think it wasn't my idea to do the Public Records Act request. Someone suggested it, and I said that's a great idea. So anyway, not my idea. So if you were the person who did it, came up with the idea, great. And Bob's going to keep going, and I like where Bob's going with this Truth and Justice podcast. How many of you have seen the logo? Have you guys seen the logo? The fact that he's got Truth and Justice tattooed on his arms, and he just have it tattooed to do it. That's the actual tattoo in Latin. It's great. It's great. And I think there's a real, not a bad way, intimidation factor built into the logo. As he's going through this process and doing new cases, people are going to see this logo and saying, "Wow, I really want to cooperate with this guy. I don't want him knocking on my door." And so that's what struck me. And what also came to me, and I'm not a big guy who listens to country music, but there's a song by Brad Paisley that struck me. What was it? It goes, "Lay Me Down." He's writing a letter to his wife and he's dead. It starts with, "If you're reading this," maybe that's what it's called. It's pretty powerful. And he says one thing, that he prays that his daughter will grow up to stand up for the innocent and the weak. And I just thought, well, that's really what Bob is doing in the new podcast. Oh, someone was commenting that so many people are listening. Yes, thank you to all for watching this. It really means a lot to me. Anyway, it means a lot. So he's going to do that. He's going to stand up for the innocent and the weak. So I don't know if he's watching this or something, but that's something he should think about. That's really his job, and I'm all for it. I mean, because if we learned anything in this case, did we not learn that there are people who cannot speak for themselves, and we need to be the ones. We need to be out there speaking for them, and it's not just Anon in this case. Which brings us to Undisclosed. Great episode today. I'm going to confess my ignorance, and probably I know going into this Undisclosed episode less about grand juries than you people did, many of you who aren't even lawyers. And what was I thinking? It's incredible, because I was wondered, okay, I was naive. I thought that going into this, that grand juries were more than they really were, and I couldn't really understand it. But what I would say is maybe one model of looking at a grand jury as it played out in this case is a mock trial or a focus group for prosecutors. And what do I mean by that? A mock trial or focus group. I'm on the civil side of cases, and my firm represents mostly Fortune 500 companies in high-stakes litigation. We tend to be historically the firm that tries the cases. Maybe some bigger firms will work it up and do the discovery. We'll try them, and it's changing. But that's because our main guy, Jerry Blackwell, and I'm not just putting a plug in. It's just true, and it's part of what I think about in my life. So that's why I share it. Is a trial lawyer genius. He really is. He's like Jerry Spence or someone like that, and he got that reputation started on the plaintiff side in any event. So we do mock trials. and focus groups. And the way those play out is a firm, let me just say how it works, a firm or client, whatever, will get a jury together from the community, pay them, do ads, whatever, try to get a cross-section, and it can range how it's done. They might have a mock jury selection. They'll have cross-examination. They might actually have actors do certain roles of witnesses, and because they want to get a good idea of how a jury might come down. And it's not like football practice having dummy D. I don't know if any of you played football, and I did, and got beat up a lot. I don't know why I played. That's another story. Dummy D, the defense that just gets beat up, during practice. It's not like that. You get someone to play the other side who's as good or better than your lawyers, and sometimes the people who come in to play the other side end up getting cases as a result of that. But in any event, that's what you do, because you want to find your weaknesses, find your strengths, so that if you actually go to trial, you can do a good job, or you know what the settlement value is for the case. And the same thing to a lesser degree with focus groups. You want to know what biases people have, how people see the case, different people from different walks of life. And that's what struck me. I thought, oh my gosh, this is a free grand jury. This is a free mock trial or focus group for the prosecutors. And what's more, even more so, it's an opportunity to intimidate witnesses, get their testimony, impeach them. It blew my mind. So they're just trying out stuff. So when Rabia was talking about the prosecutor, was it Murphy or Walsh, Vicky Walsh, trying out all this stuff about Muslim stuff and things, I think she was trying out for reaction to see, well, how is a jury going to respond to this? How far can we go with this? What will this get us? And certainly trying to intimidate Bilal. This was maybe not the beginning, but this was a key point in building up things to scare him, I think for sure. And with all the other people, with Syed, and first of all, this is a great thing. I don't know if it's for sure, but that Undisclosed does, is they drop these mini bombshells and kind of move on. Like, oh yeah, and the police said that they were going to charge Syed if, and I'm mispronouncing his name, sorry, Anand's best friend, if he didn't go along and say something against Anand at the grand jury. It's like, whoa, that's a whole story right there. I want to know about Syed. Sorry, Rabia. And that's a story I want to hear. And they just kind of drop it. I'm sure they'll bring it back up. But it's great. In that and all these other eyewitnesses. And try stuff out. And I want to know what these cops said for Jay's testimony. I just can't believe we don't have this. I've thought the whole time. And I haven't spoke out. It's not like I had a big public place, but I thought, well, what is Undisclosed doing with these grand jury transcripts? I haven't seen them anywhere. When are they coming out? We don't have them. Oof, that's I know, but just from the standpoint of impeachment, and Gutierrez didn't get them, that's just a huge black hole there. So they maximize state advantage by using these subpoenas, and then using these subpoenas beyond the time of the grand jury. I can just tell you, let's just say a little something about subpoenas. Subpoenas freak people out. They freak me out, if I receive a subpoena. Because you get this, the way it works, let's just tell a little bit about a subpoena. You get a subpoena in the mail, or you get it served, and you get it to you. And it's got all this gobbledygook legalese. It says, you have to be here at this time or else. You get it, you don't have a lawyer at the time, and you get freaked out. Just the act of getting a subpoena, especially in one of these cases, is going to intimidate a lot of people. So the fact that the state has that power to do that, the other side doesn't, is incredibly powerful. And think about this for a minute with grand jury. I never thought about this, but you have witnesses, right? Let's say all these alibi witnesses, Bilal being one, but let's take some of the others that could have been. Maybe Syed. I don't know, all these other people who were involved. So they go to this grand jury, which is a one-sided kangaroo court. They don't know anything about lawsuits or anything. And they see how they're treated, the prosecution. In fact, the prosecution runs the whole show. Do you think they might be a little less willing to come as defense witnesses at the real trial if they think it's going to be like that? So that's an incredible advantage right there. And I had never thought about that in my life. But that was going on too. So just think about this. You're the prosecutor. You've decided Adnan's the guy. You've got the problem of the alibi witnesses, which you've got to know there's more than one. More than Bilal. There's got to be others that could individually or together be able to create facts that will lead a jury at least to a reasonable inference of an alibi. Even if all of them can't say, well, I saw Adnan at exactly this time, you could get those facts together, get these witnesses together and do it. And the more witnesses that the prosecution can chip off and get out of there, the less likely they'll be able to do that. So that's what was going on. I mean, all along the way, the prosecution, I think, was trying to get rid of the alibi witnesses because remember, the cell phone records, well, Jay's testimony and the cell phone records taken together were going to get a conviction. And these were going to be relatively reliable witnesses, certainly more reliable than Jay. I don't care what happens or how biased the jury was. Again, and I'm excluding To Kill a Mockingbird biased jury. They're going to find these people more reliable than Jay. And then you have the records, cell phone records, and these cell phone records are the state's saying where he was. So all that is to say that the grand jury thing's a huge deal that I wasn't focusing on and very few people, I think, focused on. And we could do a lot. We could do really well to focus on that. So maybe some of our crowdsourcing resources, maybe there's some facts around the grand jury hearing or around these things that can be found in the public record. I don't know how. I don't know what the public records request would be that could get those, but let's start thinking about those. Let's put our thinking caps on, as my first grade teacher, Sister Creta, would say, who I had for 2 years, because it's like to say I was reelected to first grade. I was held back, and it was probably the best thing that happened to me. All right. Documentation on Bilal's arrest. That's a great idea, too. And that leads to Bilal arrested. Okay. I love how Undisclosed is very diplomatic, and that's good. It really makes for a stronger argument. But let's be real, okay? Bilal was arrested the day trial was going to start. The day trial was going to start, he was arrested. And the prosecutor found out exactly when it happened, and he sent this Brady disclosure, which I would just call an FU. It's an FU to the defense. You know, we've got you. We own you. We own your people. And, yeah, Robbie was saying that the public records request is never answered. And that's just so unexcusable. But by the way, there are federal agencies, for instance, that haven't responded to public records requests for 4 years. I mean, I'm not even going to get started. Okay. All right. So he's arrested the day of trial. It's terrible. And the state has to know, I think at that point, that Bilal was the alibi witness. And one thing I don't know the answer to, it doesn't make sense to me. Why on God's green earth were there not other alibi witnesses at the second trial? I know there was Adnan's father, but come on. I mean, I don't know a lot about criminal law, but I know from having friends who are criminal defense lawyers and public defenders that if you're in a circumstance where your client or witness is determined to lie, you can't co-sign the lie. You have to do a thing where basically they're allowed to just go in a narration where they say what they're going to say and you don't ask questions. That's, as I understand, the way it's done. Now, it's not that bad, but the idea of having someone's parents be the alibi, that sure seems weak to me. Really weak and easy to take apart on cross-examination. So I don't know what the thinking was there, why some of the other people earlier that could have been alibi witnesses weren't. But I would say, why Bilal? Because some of you may be asking that. Why do we have Bilal as the alibi witness and not these other people? Well, he knew that that's a good point about one was taken away by his own side. He knew why Adnan got the cell phone. He helped get the cell phone. Okay, so Robbie is saying that he couldn't have others because they didn't specifically remember the evening of the mosque. Oh, yeah. Well, then he was stuck with Bilal, and so they really took away his one alibi witness. Yeah, he had a specific memory. Well, and I just thought for a moment, now that what Robbie is saying makes so much sense, that Bilal was the one with a specific memory and had a reason to have a specific memory because they went over the notes together. And I was just thinking for a moment, putting myself in his shoes. If I'm Catholic, so if I went to something big like Mass at Easter or something, right, which is a time when you have a lot more people than you typically would have there. If I was there and the church was packed, lots of people would normally see me at Mass on Sunday. And it would be different because I have kids, so they wouldn't miss me with my 3 kids, ranging from 5, 3, and 21 months. And we sit right up in front, so they wouldn't miss me. But if it was just me, and I was there by myself, the priest might be the only person who remembers me because maybe I'd say something to him after Mass, compliment him on his homily or something like that. So that would make sense. And so it really is terrible. This is really something that we can't assigned to Cristina Gutierrez. They had one legit alibi witness and was taken away by the prosecution. So I don't know really what to say about that, except how terrible it is, really bad, that the one person who could do it, and of course Asia McClain. There's a lot of blame to go around, but wow. Now, why not? I'll just talk about one more thing, then we can open up to question and answer. It's just one little pet peeve. I always notice that the terms we use, the definitions are important. So I talked about earlier that I think we should use a different term. Again, if we can help it, other than profile for what Jim Clemente did on Truth and Justice podcast. I also think, and maybe we're stuck with the term, but everybody, what the prosecution cut out of Exhibit 31, the cell phone records, were not really fax cover sheets. They were cover letters, and Colin Miller called them that. These were something that, because when I hear, and maybe it's just me, I hear fax cover sheets, I think of the days when we used fax machines more in law, and someone would scrawl some note on the top of it and say, hey, some note. This was an actual cover letter. Now, it was a form cover letter, but it was an actual cover letter that explained the documents that were contained in it. So it's not just that there was this sheet and they just said, well, fax cover sheets are just fax cover sheets. We don't include them as exhibits. And that's what I would say. A lot of times we wouldn't include a fax cover sheet as an exhibit if the cover sheet's not important and the exhibit is. In this case, the cover letter was really important. So for all of you, maybe some of you are thinking, well, what's the big deal with this fax cover sheet? Well, it wasn't just a cover sheet. It was a cover letter, and the contents of the letter were essential to understand the document it enclosed. So question and answer. I will try to answer a few questions that I saw before, and one is what this case does to my faith in the justice system. Well, I don't know that it really changes it, just like what Jim Clemente did, is it took facts that already were out there that many of us knew and put it in a different way, a structure. And structure is really important. If you ask any successful writer, fiction writer, he'll tell you that, or she'll tell you that the structure is really important. And I think there's probably hundreds of thousands of people who have great ideas for books, but they don't have the right structure for writing a book, so it never gets written. So maybe a lot of us have intuitions about problems in the justice system or specifics of Hayes' murder, but if we don't have the structure for understanding it, it doesn't really mean much. So I saw a lot of the problems with the justice system we see through Undisclosed, but it's given me a structure to understand how it actually plays out in practice. And that what I've seen from that is worse than I thought. Every episode, I think, wow, there's a lot more problems. So thankfully, we have people waking up, and I think changes will be made. And one thing I'll just say that piggybacks on what Bob says in his episodes about this being a movement is every time you talk about this case to someone, every time you retweet it, every time you make a post about it, it raises it in the public's awareness. And that has a trickle-up approach, I think, to the prosecutors and the police. Because being a lawyer, if I am certain that something I'm doing on a case, something I'm writing, a question I'm asking in a deposition, an argument I'm making, a letter I'm writing, is actually going to be out there to the public, it's going to change my behavior. There's a lawyer, a judge that says his statement is that lawyers are a species of humans that change when observed. Their behavior changes when observed. And he said that in the context of if there's a meet and confer, if there's an argument back and forth, in some cases he requires that it be recorded between the lawyers and the parties. Because when they know the tape is running, they're going to behave differently. So the more you bring up this and it gets into public awareness, the actions of prosecutors and police are going to change. And so I think that's something there. That's the question I remember that people ask. So sorry if you asked them earlier. I don't remember the other questions. Are there any other questions or comments anyone wants to make? All right. Well, I think I'm going to sign out. Oh, someone said if they use smartphone location data, would it not be acceptable in court? That's a great point. If it was today, in a forensically acceptable way, as I understand it, it would be pretty easy to determine, or easier to determine where that cell phone was, depending on the specifications on the smartphone. And someone says their idea about Don being innocent versus guilty has changed. And a lot of people's ideas about Don have changed, and I think rightfully so, in the sense that we're maybe returning to stasis, where we're now saying, well, gosh, we should really look at Don. Someone said, oh, I'm sorry, and this is the Adnan Syed companion. How much do you think this is Maryland specific? Well, I would say that the degree that this went on, some of the stuff went on in this case, seems heightened, higher than other places. So do I think that most places a grand jury is used like a mock trial or focus group for prosecutors? Not exactly the way it was here, but I think that it has that effect. And I would say the same thing about the witness intimidation. I don't think it's to the same degree other places, but it could be. And what comes out to me is inherent in the act of having a prosecutor and having having police. There's already this power, but it's to a degree, and Adnan Syed companion said it's not done like this where they practice, and so I think that's true. There's a benefit in having extreme cases to represent principles, and so the benefit here is that the principle of some of the stuff that's going on is heightened and displayed, and we can take it and apply it to our jurisdictions where maybe it's not as bad. Someone asked whether someone could stop Bilal from fleeing. I don't know about that. The problem is that realistically speaking, someone said the Bilal hearing was nuts. Absolutely. Realistically speaking, I'm sorry, that's the Adnan Syed companion. Realistically speaking, sorry, I'm getting there. For the defense, you need to have a witness who's willing. It's a little bit different, I think, practically. I keep saying practically speaking. When you're the prosecution, you can charge people with crimes. You can do all sorts of things the defense can't do. You kind of need a willing witness if you're the defense, especially an alibi witness. So, but I think if they got the guy in court, he would have said enough to get them where they needed to. And so if they could have gotten him in court, I think if they could have gotten him in court, they could have gotten him where he needed to be. Now, Colin Miller pointed out, someone else pointed out, and this shocked me and angered me too. We know that there's prior testimony, and they could have presented, say, hey, Bilal is unavailable, we're presenting his prior testimony. And it was said that they were concerned that it wouldn't mean anything because he was accused of child molestation. Now, I'm rusty on the rules of evidence in terms of bringing in someone's crime, but as I understand, he was never convicted, he was charged. I don't know whether that would even come in. I think they could probably keep it out. But in any event, So what? So the guy was charged with something. We've got some testimony. It's the only alibi we have. Let's go with it. And someone said they were trying to scare him. I think so. I think they were trying to scare Bilal with the 92 reference. I think they didn't know that much, and they wanted Bilal to think they knew more than they did. There were probably some accusations, and they were trying to get him to think that they knew a lot more than they did. And that's just something, we do as lawyers. We make suggestions, and, why would they drop charges regardless of minor or an adult? I think they dropped charges against Bilal because there were some problems, there were some holes in the testimony, and they thought there'd be a problem with the conviction. I think they thought if he lawyered up in a direct way and he was put in a corner, he might just tell all. And so the best thing they could say is, hey, get out of the picture for a while, and we'll let loose on you. We won't go to town on you. So I think that's what happened, and that's why they let him go. They had the carrot, they had the stick. Someone said what Urich's mentality is. I don't know. If I were him in his shoes, I'd be hoping that it blew over, which it might, in the sense that what was said in the Undisclosed episode about the brief is that the state put itself in a position where they either say that there's a Brady violation or admit that Cristina Gutierrez was ineffective. Well, I think it's no-brainer on what they're going to do. They admit that if they're in that position, they admit that Cristina Gutierrez is ineffective. And if they do that, maybe Kevin Urich feels the heat's a little bit off him, and he says, well, there's all these accusations, it happens in all these cases. They lost because Cristina Gutierrez was ineffective. And so that's probably what he's hoping for, that's the one the state opts for. Did prosecution think Bilal got a non-hotels, like got him a cell phone? No, I think they brought up a hotel in 1992 because there was some allegation that he had some untoward conduct with a minor, and the police didn't know much about it, and they wanted Bilal to think they knew all about it. So that was why that question was there, is what I think. They were planting that seed in the grand jury, and again saying, hey, you think this is bad during a grand jury, think how bad it's going to be at trial. And so I think that's the way it played out. And I will say that Cristina Gutierrez's idea, apparently, that Bilal was going to speak without, say, I'm going to say this, but I'm not waiving my Fifth Amendment rights. That's really odd. That's the sort of thing people do in discovery, where they have 1,000 objections and then say, well, without waiving the foregoing objections, here's my answer. It's pretty ineffective and annoying. So I don't know what the point was on that, but it certainly didn't do any good and was silly and said something about her view on things. Did Bilal ever confirm or deny the charge? Well, I know Rabia's in contact with Bilal, and as she described it on the episode, and this is as much as I know, is that he hasn't really gotten into the detail with the charge. I will say that apparently, well, I don't want to comment on this because we just know what the charge was. It seems as though there was a lot of support to it. From what I can gather, it didn't seem like it just came out of the woodwork. So I don't know that he ever denied it or admitted it. I don't think that's what Rabia's back and forth with him has been about. I think it's mostly to the focusing on the alibi witness at trial, which is what we care about for our purposes. Anything else? Going once? Going twice? All right. Well, I'm going to sign out. I have work to do, things to clean, store to go to, pick up some groceries. But I had to comment tonight, or my head probably would have exploded. So have a great night. Be safe. Let's keep going. Let's keep our heads about us. Let's keep going and enjoy the ride, because a lot of good facts are coming out. Good evidence, not bad evidence, good evidence. Have a good one. Oh, someone from Australia. Yes, all right. Have a good one. Bye.